We're recording. Thank you. So my name is Jennifer Gelman. I work in the Society Science and Technology Division at the Central Library of Brooklyn Public Library. We are pleased this evening to present the Yale Science Communication Team, a graduate student organization that presents cutting-edge science to the general public. In the Science in the News program, they presented in August when we were still shut down and nothing had like reopened yet. And it was very, very nice to be able to present this program to sort of bring us back and to thinking about the library and what we can offer our patrons. So we are very pleased that they are here again, the 2021 season. And 3 PhD students will each give a brief presentation on a general topic of relevance to modern science and society. In this talk, Taking the Good from the Bad, the speakers will discuss how modern work on venom and disease can give us insight into new medical treatments. We will be having the science communication team come back 2 more times this spring, May 13th and June 15th. Please keep an eye out on Brooklyn Public Library's website for our calendar listing. I don't have the link yet to give you, but we will be posting it soon as well. So on May 13th and June 15th, we'll have them back for different talks. So without further ado, I hand it over to the group. Thank you. To Christiane.
Yes, thank you so much, Jennifer. Let me just share screen here. Can everyone see that okay? All right, great. So thank you so much for coming to our talk today, and thank you to the Brooklyn Public Library for hosting us. We're really excited to be here and to be presenting our program, which is called Taking the Good from the Bad, Transforming Afflictions into Treatments. And it's all about taking something negative and turning it into a positive. So hopefully it will be a very uplifting sort of presentation. And we will be hearing from 3 speakers today, Julie LeBeau, Daniele Parisi, and Aritha Srivatsan. So essentially we're going to hear from each of these speakers in turn, and please save all of your questions for the end, where we will have a brief Q&A period, which I am happy to moderate. And if you do have a question, just use the raise your hand function or drop the question in the chat and I can read it out. All right, so let's get started. First, a little bit about our speakers. First, we're going to hear from Julie, who is in the Department of Neurology at Yale, and she researches nerve pain. And a fun fact about her is that she is a spider whisperer since the 90s, which is a very enviable skill. Next, we're going to hear from Daniele, who is in the Department of Immunobiology, where he researches drug repositioning. And a fun fact and a very surprising fact about him is that he has never seen Star Wars, so feel free to tease him about that after this talk. And then finally, we're going to hear from Aritha, who is in the Department of Epidemiology, where she researches COVID-19 immunity, so very, very relevant to what's going on in the world today. And an impressive fact about her is that she speaks 6 languages. All right. So I'd like to give you a brief overview of what we will be discussing today. And I'd like to start with a very general fact of life, which is this: as we go through our lives, we are constantly faced with things that have the potential to harm us. So these may be things that originate inside our own bodies, such as cancer, or various diseases, such as heart disease. We may be subjected to trauma and injury, such as if we get into a car accident and suffer a head injury, or if we are bitten by a venomous snake. And sometimes the things that harm us are incredibly small, so small that they can't be seen with the naked eye. We may become infected with different viruses or bacteria, or we can contract illnesses carried by insects, such as malaria, which is carried by some mosquitoes. And many scientists research the things that harm us to better understand them, and this allows them to use that knowledge to create treatments. So the topic we are covering today deals with this question of how do we turn the bad, or the things that harm us, into something good? However, this question is not so simple, because rarely in biology is something inherently bad. It instead depends on the context or how you look at it. So as an example, we can take the word bacteria, and this might conjure up images of food poisoning, such as when our lettuce gets contaminated and makes us sick. And this is often perpetrated by a bacterium called E. coli, which you might have heard about in the news. However, bacteria also have some surprisingly great qualities. For example, did you know that bacteria are responsible for making our yogurts and cheeses? So kudos to them for that. And in addition, many types of bacteria live naturally inside of our bodies and are crucial to our health, often aiding in our digestive processes. And we would literally die if we didn't have them inside us. And in this way, bacteria are good for us in some circumstances, but can make us sick in others. And just as context is important in determining whether something is good or bad for us, the amount of something can also dictate whether it has a positive or negative effect. So take radiation as an example. In high amounts, radiation can poison us and cause our death, which is what happened to the famous scientist Marie Curie after being consistently exposed to radiation during her research over many years. However, radiation also has some surprisingly really great qualities. X-rays use small doses of radiation to help doctors diagnose our injuries. So this X-ray on the left shows the lungs of someone infected with COVID-19. And in addition, when used sparingly, radiation can also be a treatment to fight against cancer. So therefore, with a change in perspective, scientists can take something dangerous like radiation and turn it into a helpful medical tool. So as such, with a little imagination, we can find the silver lining in a bad situation and even transform something bad into something good that works for us instead of against us. So today, our three speakers will each tell us a story about turning something negative into a positive. First, we'll hear from Julie, who will talk about how studying snake venom, of all things, may hold the key to finding a treatment for chronic pain. Next, Daniele will talk about how we can repurpose the unwanted side effects of drugs into treatments for other conditions. And finally, Aritha will tell us about how, by using small parts of deadly germs, we can create life-saving vaccines that protect us from being infected in the first place. So with that, I'll hand things over to our first speaker, Julie.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you again to everyone for coming today. So the topic of my talk is pain and toxinology. Toxinology being the study of toxins, which are those toxic molecules that you can find in venoms and poisons. And this little guy right there might have a lot to do in either story. So to give you some context, I would like you to imagine that you're taking a walk through the bushes somewhere tropical, maybe in the Amazon, when suddenly you feel something brushing the side of your leg. You stop, look down, and realize that you were just bitten by a snake. And not any kind of snake, a venomous one. So what exactly is the deal with that? Why would it hurt you to be bitten by a snake and will have maybe lethal consequences? Where do venoms come from? And why would a snake even bite you? To try to start understanding that, we need to realize that venoms have been around for a really, really long time, much longer than us, and have survived through several generations of natural selections for millions of years. And so the reason for that is that they do have a very important purpose for venomous animals. And so the two main purposes that we commonly find are one for attacking prey, which is something that we often see in snakes and spiders, and these generally lead to paralysis, so your inability to be able to move any muscle, which can become very convenient for both species as they try to eat their prey whole. The other thing that we commonly see is a defense mechanism against predators, and that's something that we often see in bees, wasps, or stonefish. So I'm not sure if any of you have ever been stung before while you're like at a fun summer barbecue, or you just walk out of the pool, step on a dead wasp, and it really is painful. So if you know the feeling, that's the reason for that. It's for defense. And so these two are actually interchangeable and can be found in either species, and sometimes some species even carry two different types of venoms, one for attack and one for defense. But so what exactly is happening to you? You've just been bitten by a snake, as we talked about earlier in the story. What is happening to your body? Well, so the venom is stored in venom sacs that are located behind the snake eyes. And so these venoms is like going through the fangs of the snake, just like it would go through small capillaries into your flesh. Once they get into your bloodstream, those little guys called neurotoxin, which are these toxic molecules that affect your nervous system, they spread everywhere. And what they do is that they actually cause the connection between your nervous system and other parts of your body, including your muscles, to be non-responsive. And so you have your cells that can burst, your body moves in unpredictable way, or it leads to full-on paralysis like we talked about. But other species also sometimes lead to other interesting phenomena. For example, vipers cause their prey to bleed to death. So the way they do that is by causing the blood to thin up immensely so that you bleed much faster than you normally would. So altogether, that sounds pretty terrible. And I'm sure most of you are thinking you won't be finding me anywhere near where snakes might live. But could we actually try to think of these terrible things that they just do to us and how we could like flip it around to become beneficial? So for instance, I just mentioned that vipers cause their prey to bleed to death, and that's by blood thinning. So they are procoagulant. So maybe we could use that to reduce blood clots, which are a huge problem in patients with hypertension, and increase your risk of heart attack and stroke. Another aspect is, I said, they would cause your cells to burst. What if we could make it just cause cell death in cells that we don't want, such as in cancer cells? And finally, I said that it causes a block between the nervous system and the muscle and that connection. That's actually what we need for anesthesia, and in some cases, to even develop painkillers. So the idea of using venoms in medicine is almost as old as medicine itself, and that is kind of start with the road of Asclepius, which is the symbol of medicine. Most commonly, you might have seen the two snakes, and that is not the actual symbol of medicine, but that's a debate for another time. And so Asclepius in Greek mythology, his followers would use venoms and snakes themselves to protect civilians and cure illnesses. In ancient Egypt, as well as other ancient civilization in Greece and in China, they've used for a really long time apitherapy, which consisted in using the bee venom directly applied to a site of injury or to where you were trying to treat something. And they used it from gout to baldness by directly by a small application of the bee venom. And another use of venoms that date from a really long time is the antidote Teriac. So this antidote was developed around a similar time as apitherapy back in these ancient civilizations, but it became very popular in the Middle Ages. And so the concept of it started with developing an anti-venom or an anti-poison by this king that was obsessed with the fear of being poisoned. So developed Teriac from using the skin and the flesh of snakes. Progressively over the years, it developed by being mixed with 60 plus different ingredients and was kind of used as a cure-it-all, which did not work in most cases, but the idea was there. And so today, venoms are actually going through some form of a second wind, where with the advances of technology, we are actually able to kind of break it down, and I'll get into more details in a bit, but break down the venom to kind of find specific molecules that are useful to us. And so doing that, we've been able to find new drug targets, fight diseases themselves, as well as develop insecticides, and finally develop new treatment tools. So from the venom of something that is originally harmful to us, we're able to now better understand a whole lot of different diseases, find treatments for those diseases using those venoms, as well as figure out new targets and strategies. So now, how is that linked to pain? If we circle back to our original story, you're once again back in the Amazon taking a walk, and once again you feel something touching the side of your leg. But let's say that this time you don't actually stop and look and see that you were bitten. Let's say you just think, oh, this is fine. This is just probably a leaf or a twig, and your body does not react and does not signal pain. If you do not have pain, you'll go on your walk, and a few moments later, you collapse on the ground because you were bitten by a venomous snake. And this is just show you that pain is actually very important. It works as the alarm in your brain signaling you of a threat, of a danger coming to you. So in this case, you not looking down at your leg and realizing that you were bitten by a snake meant that you probably would die. And with pain, you will be seeking medical assistance. So how exactly does pain work? So here we focus on the bite of the snake. The fangs entering your flesh will enlighten sensors in your skin that will detect that there's an external stimulus. This stimulus is translated into electricity that goes down pain cables all the way to those pain ganglions. They're kind of like pain super balls that are located in your back in between each of your vertebrae. And from these ganglions, they go to the spinal cord and then finally to the brain. And the brain will then decide whether or not this is worthy of a pain response. And so one of the most important steps for the brain to be able to make this decision takes place in those ganglions where painful gates are located. So if we take a closer look at them, those painful gates are safeguarded by a very powerful magician, here just like Gandalf. And so if we step away from the example of the snake here and think of you putting your hand on a hot stove, the stove is warm, but it's not burning you, all right? So the stimulus will be fairly weak. There's a little bit of electricity being sent up to your painful gates, telling you it's just warm. Gandalf is strong enough to push them out to the side, and they shall not pass through the gates. However, if we start increasing the temperature of the stove, it's actually going to start becoming painfully hot. The signal becomes stronger, there is more electricity arriving to the gate, and this time the signal can go through up to the brain, and then a pain response is elicited. However, in people with pathological pain, that's when their gates, in a lot of instances, do not work properly. They either work too well, they're too sensitive, or not enough, and there's not enough pain being produced. So in this case, which is what we see the most commonly with people with chronic pain, Gandalf is extremely old and sick, and therefore a much weaker signal of something that would just be normally warm is sufficient to push him out of the way. And so in patients that suffer, for example, from erythromelalgia, which you can see written down at the bottom of the screen, their hands and feet feel like they're in excruciating burning pain that can start from just the temperature being a little warm outside. And the opposite has also been observed, where those gates in some patients are permanently closed, which means that no matter how strong the signal gets, they could be plunging their hands into lava, the signal will never go through and never reach the brain, and they don't feel any pain at all, which is terrible in either case. However, this shows us that these gates are like super great to develop pain treatments, because clearly if it doesn't work, there is no pain at all. So can we actually use venoms to block these pain gates? So here what we want to do is, yes, we want to block those gates, but we don't want to block them completely, because like we saw, pain is important. We don't want to get rid of it completely. So instead we want to make Gandalf stronger. Another thing that's important, and Dan will be talking more about this in his coming talk, is that those gates are not just painful gates. Those gates are located in those pain ganglions, but also in your heart and in your brain. And so as you can imagine, if we block all the gates that are in your body, some really bad consequences could happen. And so actually there's been a recent study where they used the Chinese cobra, and they were able to block the painful gates only, and not of the ones that are in your brain and in your heart, which meant no side effects. And this way we could go full loop. So how do we do that exactly? How do we go from the snake venom to pills in a bottle? So the first thing that you need to do is milk your animal out just like you would milk a cow. But instead of pressing down the breast to get the milk, you press on their head or on the tail of a scorpion, for example, to extract the venom out, which is also referred to as the milk. And so once you've got this milk, what happens? So there's two main ways for us to figure out what could be potential drugs. First, we have this big library of different venoms from a ton of different venomous animals. And so then we want to find out, break down those venoms and see which one would hit the target that we're interested in, here being the gates. Or we have the venom of one unscreened animal and we want to find out what is this venom composed of. And it's made of a cocktail of different molecules, those neurotoxin and other toxic molecules. And we want to break it down to figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad. So the first thing that we do is we break down that venom into all its different molecules. Then we want to test out which of these individual molecules actually hit the target. So we try them one by one and we see until one actually works in the result that we want, which is blocking those gates. Once we do, it's great. We keep on going until we have a bunch of different molecules that do that. Then we take the good and we throw away the bad. Once we figure out which molecules we wanted, we can get rid of the ones that are either bad for us or that are not just doing the effect that we want. And then we can try to develop medicines and hopefully then they get FDA approved and we can use them to treat pain or other illnesses. And importantly, we also check that those different molecules are not affecting other parts of your body, leading to bad side effects. And so venoms have actually been very useful, much like beyond pain for tons of other illnesses. And these are just a few examples. And so scorpion have actually been shown to be great at fighting autoimmune diseases and reducing inflammations, including fighting infections and being good maybe for allergies too. Sea anemones have actually that property of like causing those cells to be killed, which can be great for fighting cancer. Vipers, like I mentioned earlier, cause you to bleed to death. And this finding has led to the development of an FDA-approved drug called captopril, which is reducing hypertension. And finally, the platypus, which maybe you didn't even know was a venomous animal, has been shown great progress towards fighting type 2 diabetes. So now I want you to kind of like think back and see whether the problem could also be the cure. Could the pain caused by a venomous snake could actually be used to treat pain itself? And maybe next time that you're getting treated for any kind of illness, for all you know, that could be derived from the venom of a random animal. And so with that, I'll leave it to Dan. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Julie, for the nice talk. And thank you for the amazing opportunity from the Brooklyn Library and also from the Yale Science Communication Group. So let's move to the next topic. And the next talk will be about drug repositioning and how to turn side effects into beneficial effects from drug. So I want to start from a person that actually devoted his life in studying how the substances that have an effect on our body can be poisonous. And this guy, Paracelsus, who is was a physician from Switzerland in the 15th to 16th centuries, he actually really realized that all the substances by itself can be poisonous, and that depends on the context and of course on the dosage. So those substances that in the Middle Age and the early modern era were called substances are actually in the modern medicine, contemporary medicines, are called drugs. So what is exactly a drug? A drug is a substance that has a biological effect on our body. So medicines are drugs, but also recreative substances and substances of abuse like marijuana or cocaine. Those are, of course, drugs. But the nicotine in tobacco is drug, and also the caffeine in the cup of coffee or in the tea that we assume daily is a drug. So you might not know that the most used drug worldwide is actually the coffee. So all those substances by itself, they can show side effects, and that is connected, of course, to a potential poisonous effect on the human body. Let's look closely on how drugs work. So let's assume that we are getting our morning coffee. The substance contained in the coffee is the caffeine, and the interaction between this substance and a target in our body, and more particularly in the brain, is connected to the biological response, that is the hyperactivity, the awakeness, and that is exactly why we get the coffee. So this looks great. That's why we want our coffee every morning, but it's not all. In fact, all the drugs that we assume, and also the coffee, of course, interact with different targets in our body. Not only the main one, the one that we're interested in. For example, for the caffeine, we have targets in our gut, in our stomach, and in our heart. So the effect of the interaction between the molecule, the caffeine, with different targets from the one that we were interested in hitting, which was in the one in the brain, gives us the side effect. For example, if we are very sensitive to caffeine, or if you abuse of coffee during the day, we can get nausea, we can get tiredness, which is exactly the opposite effect than the one that we would like to have when we get coffee. Stomachache, they're all related to the interaction between this molecule and different targets spread around the body. So with my talk, I'm showing you that there is actually a way to turn those undesired effects due to the interaction between a drug and different targets in the human body in something better, in something that can be beneficial for the patients. So let's talk about some examples. Let's start from this molecule. So it was the late 90s, and a British pharma company decided to bring on the clinic this molecule called sildenafil to study its putative beneficial effect on the heart. So to cure heart problem. Well, there was the original idea, there was the hypothesis, but something went wrong. So when they started testing this molecule on the patient, the doctors realized that the main biological effect was due to the interaction between the drug and a target which was a different one from the expected one. And it was not in the heart, but it was in the genitals. And the result was a marked penile erection. So the doctors were like confused. Okay, what are we gonna do now? Are we gonna trash this molecule? Because it's not gonna be useful to treat heart problem. And instead, what they did was just figuring out that the molecule that could have been used for different purpose. And instead of curing heart problem, he became a lead drug to cure erectile dysfunction. And that's how we got the Viagra. So it was actually marketed to cure different way of heart problem, let's say. But this is a case of drug repositioning. Let's look closely on the way how drug repositioning works. So we start from a first indication for a drug. The indication is the condition that the drug is suggested to be on the market to treat any kind of disease or medical condition. So it's a treatment that the drug is marketed for. But every drug, as we said, for the interaction with different targets in our body can generate side effects. And if we are smart enough and we have the right tools, we can use one of those side effects to actually treat a different disease, and we can have a different indication. So there will be a new patent, a new drug coming from the same molecule. So why would we do that? Why would we look at the side effect of the drug to make another medicine, another drug? Well, the answer lies in the intrinsic property of the drug discovery process. So the drug discovery is a very long and tedious process. It can take up to 20 years, and it needs up to $2 billion of US dollars in investment. That means it's extremely long and extremely expensive. It's also risky. So a pharma company might not want to waste all this money to go to a putative failure, for example. So in order to speed up and make cheaper and less risky this process, we can use drug repositioning, and we can repurpose molecules that we already have on the market, or they already failed for a specific indication, since many tests are already available and many information about the pharmacology and the toxicology of those molecules are already there. That will be extremely beneficial, not only for the pharma companies, but mostly for the patients that are waiting for a cure for specific diseases. Let's go on with a different example. So we talked about the sildenafil becoming Viagra. That was an easy example. There was not such a dangerous drug. It was very easy to repurpose. There was not other strong side effect than the first one, and it was the main effect that it was actually the penile erection was way more stronger than the other one. So it was very easy to make a choice. But let's look at this other drug that instead shocked the European public opinion after the Second World War. So I'm talking about the thalidomide. So thalidomide is a drug that was marketed in the late 50s, beginning of the 60s in Europe, and it helped a whole continent to find back their sleep. So it was a sedative and hypnotic, but also it was extremely useful to treat morning sickness for pregnant women. So Europe after the war needed offspring, needed children, needed to find back their sleep. This drug was a wonder drug. It was something that apparently Europe really needed, and Europe really welcomed it with a very warm heart. But something happened immediately after the molecule arrived on the market. It was clear that there were side effects. They were not being discovered during the test. I'm talking about developmental deformities. So a whole generation was born with deformities after the mothers were exposed to this drug. Mothers that were using this drug actually to treat their morning sickness or to sleep better. So all the European pharmaceutical agencies withdrew immediately this molecule from the market and banned thalidomide. And of course, all the public opinion was shocked, and people were horrified in finding out what this drug was doing to this new European generation. But that was not the end for thalidomide. So it started with a first indication. It showed side effect, but in the late 90s, beginning of the 2000s, a group of physicians realized that the same biological effect that was behind the deformities causing this teratogenic effect, as it's called, and the birth of children with no or very small limbic appendices was also useful to treat some kind of very nasty forms of cancers. I'm talking about multiple myeloma. And at the moment, this drug is back to the market and is used to treat multiple myeloma in a very successful way. Of course, it's impossible to administer this drug to a pregnant woman. But in case of not pregnancy and in case of a multiple myeloma, this drug is extremely efficient. So you see, we went from a very dangerous drug that showed side effects that were horrifying to something that is actually now helping patients and doctors. Let's move to an extra step to dangerous and poisonous substances, and let's look at substances that we might not think we could use for drug repurposing. I'm talking about drugs of substances of abuse or recreational drugs. Maybe most of you already know that marijuana is already patented and is already used for pharmacological purposes, and there are actually more than 300 patents all around the US that are using the active molecule of marijuana, the tetrahydrocannabinoid, to treat different conditions, from anxiety to appetite disorder, and of course pain, just to go back to what Julie talked about before. But we can push it a little bit farther. Marijuana is is actually well known so in our society, and of course in many places is not that welcomed, but there are substances that are actually that carries actually a bigger stigma. So this list of drugs was made after the 70s, so after the hippie movement, to classify substances based on their ability of their ability to become to be addictive. So the Food and Drug Administration in the US decided that some of those drugs, like heroin, ecstasy, or LSD, could have not been used neither for medical uses, not either for medical purpose. So for decades, those drugs were not even studied in the hospital or in the universities, and were just forgotten. Well, prohibitionists with the decades went a little bit down, fortunately, and we realized that those drugs are actually extremely powerful, can be dangerous, but can be also extremely beneficial. Let's look at one of those drugs, the LSD, for example. So LSD is the father of the psychedelic drugs. So how does it work? When we assume the LSD goes to the brain, it hits the brain, and as a effect, all the gates that are in the brain that are responsible to give us the perception of the external world changes their way of functioning. And what we have is a distorted view and distorted perception of all the stimuli. So different smells, different tastes, different images, different colors, and that's the hallucinogenic effect. Well, how could we ever use this as a beneficial drug? Well, it's actually happening, and we have the LSD in a phase 2 clinical trial at the moment, and is showing extremely beneficial effect to treat deep depression, major depression for terminal patients that are in a late stage of diseases like cancer. So for these patients where the reality doesn't have colors anymore and everything is in darkness, using this stimulant for the brain helps with, of course, the support of physicians and psychologists, can actually help to find back a reason to be active and to be up. So after all this list of examples, I want to conclude my talk talking about a specific way of doing drug repositioning. So how is the people in the university or in the clinics doing this? How is repurposing a drug side effect to a new therapeutic indication? Well, there are many ways of doing it, but one very interesting one that I wanted to focus on is connected to machine learning. You might have already heard about machine learning in a previous Science in the News talk. We actually are supposed to live in the data revolution area, so you might have been already exposed to this machine learning and the knowledge about machine learning. But in a nutshell, machine learning is an approach that attempts to predict new results, new outcome about anything by using mathematical algorithms and data that we already have, previous data that we already have about those about this field. So we learn from our previous experience and we make prediction in a fast and an easy way using computational techniques. And we can do this even with drugs and targets. So we can study the characteristics of a drug and characteristics of the target in our body, and exactly like Tinder matches the users in order to create new putative couples, we can match the drug with the target in our body, and we can say that due to the side effect that we already know about the drug, this drug might be able to also interact with a different target and giving another therapeutic indication that can be beneficial and can lead to a successful drug discovery process. So with this, it's all from my side, and I wanted to conclude with this very interesting quote from Sir James Black. He's a Nobel laureate in medicine, 1988. He was the father of the beta blockers, and he actually, during his Nobel speech, he said that the best way to discover a new drug is to start from a known one, which might be either good or bad. And what if we push it so far that instead of using a medicine which it looks to be bad, we use the same pathogen that it's the cause of the disease to cure the disease itself, or to prevent the disease. So that's exactly what Arikta is gonna talk about in the next meeting. And with this, I conclude and I give the word to Arikta.
Hey, I hope you can see my screen all right. Thank you, Julie and Dan, for putting up great presentations. And now you know how something bad, such as a venom, can be used to help us, and also how we can use harmful side effects of drugs in such a way that it becomes useful for us. Next up, we're going to talk about infectious germs or pathogens and how we can use a part of them to fight them. So various kinds of infectious pathogens, such as bacteria, viruses, or fungi, infect us through various routes like person-to-person contact, or infected food, or water, or aerosols, and sometimes even from infected syringes. Each of these germs manifest in us in a very different way to make us sick with different symptoms. For instance, some give us a fever and others can give us diarrhea. I mean, in the age of COVID, we all know about like aerosols and COVID spreading through aerosols, but I'm here to like delve deeper into this. So although a small number of pathogens or germs enter the body at a time, they can multiply in our body and like increase in number at crazy high speeds. So this increased number is what causes us to get sick. In order to keep us from getting sick, our body's immune system is designed such that these germs can be prevented from multiplying and growing in number in our body. So when these germs attack us and enter us, our immune system attacks them like in turn, and the cells of the immune system act as the soldiers. Now, if our body is going to war, I'd rather it be with like really good weapons. So what are the weapons in this case? One of the weapons that our body uses is called antibodies. These are small molecules or proteins produced by the cells of our immune system. And they act as weapons to prevent germs from causing infections. Now, the immune system remembers. Once the immune system fights a particular pathogen, it remembers exactly what the pathogen looks like for future reference, and then plasters these wanted posters around us. And this helps us ensure that if the same pathogen ever infects us in the future, it's fought off more easily by the immune system. You can think of this like some cells of the immune system act like patrol officers looking for any known enemies, and like those enemies are apprehended as soon as they're found. So to sum that up, our cells, these brown wacky things in the image, get infected by pathogens, which are these red circles on them. Then there are these wise old nerdy looking cells that recognize the pathogen and train the nearby soldier cells to how they train the soldier cells with exactly how to beat those germs. Then the soldier cells deploy the weapons and the antibody is killed. Sorry, the antibody kills the pathogen and the immune system wins. Does that mean that our immune system has to be less effective the first time a pathogen attacks us? Like, what if we didn't have to get infected for our immune system to make a memory response? Turns out we can fool our immune system into thinking that it has already seen a pathogen before. Now, let's take a short detour before we get to the answer to this question. I I am sure some of you have heard of Where's Wally. It's a British series of children's puzzle books that was like released here in the US as Where's Waldo. The objective was to find Waldo in these like increasingly complex illustrations where like random people were doing random amusing things. So how do you find Waldo? If you were a computer, you could use a complex algorithm and figure out exactly where to look for Waldo and say, okay, there Waldo is. But normally you'd probably first ask what Waldo looks like, and then take a long, hard look at any defining characteristics of Waldo. Say, you think that Waldo's characteristic red and white striped shirt is fun, or like his glasses are round and he has a cane. So you remember to look for his face with those glasses or his t-shirt. Then you might like decide to look for that in this image, and like in this particular example, he's right in the middle of it, but there you spot Waldo by his cane, his glasses, his t-shirt, anything that defines him and sets him apart from the other people in this crowd. Turns out this is exactly what vaccines do. Say this is a virus, a type of pathogen. It has some characteristic features or proteins, such as these red bulbs or these orange circles. Now we want the immune system to be trained to look for these characteristic features. Let's say the red bulb. Now, if we want the immune system to look for these red bulbs, we use a vaccine. So the solution that's injected into our arm basically has some version of these red bulbs, so that the immune system can then think, the immune system now knows how to recognize these red bulbs. And the next time there's like a virus or a germ with these same red bulbs, it knows that the red bulbs are not part of our body, and it's like harmful, so those need to be attacked. And that's how and that basically is how the body, or like we take a part of the very thing that makes us sick in the first place to train our immune system to beat it. In summary, how vaccines work is that either a weakened, a killed form, or a part of a disease is injected into our body. Then the body creates weapons that are very specific to these germs. And then the next time, if the same weapon, the next time if the same germ ever infects us, the antibodies that were produced earlier return to destroy these germs. Now, the difference here is that these gray things are basically not infectious, so they don't really cause disease in us, and which is why inserting them is okay. But when these red forms, which are actually infectious, enter our body, we need to destroy them as soon as we can. In essence, this is how vaccines help you. Do they help others as well? With COVID going on, we've all been hearing a lot about things like herd immunity, or people getting like high risk people getting vaccinated first. But how does this really manifest in reality? So in this image, all the light gray hexagons are people who are healthy, which means they're susceptible to infection. The light gray, the red hexagon is people who are infected, and we can see the infection spreading through the population. And the green hexagons are those people who are immune because of a prior exposure. And the dark gray are those who are immune because of vaccination. So in essence, the green and the dark gray are both people who are protected from becoming red or infected. Now, if only 5% of the population is vaccinated, a lot more people can end up getting infected. And the infection also spreads really fast. Now, if a larger portion, that's 30% of the population, is already vaccinated, the infection spreads slower and to fewer people. Now, more of the people who are not even vaccinated are still protected because of others being vaccinated. Similarly, if 75% of the population is vaccinated, the 75% of the population is vaccinated, the infection is pretty much like stopped after it spreads very little. So now that sounds pretty cool, right? Why would anyone not want to get vaccinated? Turns out vaccine hesitancy is almost as old as vaccines themselves are. As Julie and Dan talked about in their talks, this idea of taking the good from the bad is pretty old. The first vaccine was discovered in the early 1800s, and this was against smallpox. The closely related cowpox virus was used to make the smallpox vaccine. So this image was published in around 1850s, and it was published by the Anti-Vaccine Society. So that's like very soon after the first vaccine was produced. This image shows people with cow-like appendages after being given the cowpox, inactivated cowpox virus as a vaccine. This obviously did not happen, but it was enough to create panic. But how does vaccination actually work in terms of working for the community? Now imagine going out to an extremely crowded place on a rainy day with no umbrella. If everyone else around you is holding up an umbrella, you might not even realize that it is raining. But the only reason you're protected is that everyone else is holding up an umbrella. Now, you might be extremely dry and you're like, oh, I don't see any rain. Why are we doing this again? You could just put down the umbrellas. But the only reason you are not affected by the rain is because everyone else is holding up an umbrella. Now you can think of this rain as an infection and an umbrella as the vaccine protecting you from the rain. So you are only protected because everyone else is vaccinated. In summary, finally, I'd like to say that stay safe, use a mask, and get vaccinated. These are the groups that can get vaccinated in Connecticut, but if you are in New York, for instance, New York has this really cool website that you can check your eligibility at, and you can also find places near you that are offering vaccinations, and you can check out if they have openings to get vaccinated as soon as possible. And as Christian said in the beginning, nothing in biology is inherently good or bad. It's all extremely context dependent. And we've talked about venoms, drugs and their side effects, and germs. But if you look around, there are several more examples of things that were seemingly harmful, but humankind managed to repurpose it into something good. For instance, Christian briefly touched upon radiation, but if you look around, there are several more such things. So thank you for attending our talk today. And if you have any questions, we are happy to take them.
All right, that was great. Thank you to all of our speakers. So we're running a little bit short on time, so perhaps it would be best to prioritize questions so that we have maybe one question per speaker. So I think maybe we'll start with Julie and ask if anyone has a question for Julie. If there are no questions for Julie, then we can move on to Dan. Does anyone have a question for Dan?
I have a quick question for Dan. I was wondering what was it about thalidomide? You were talking about the different body systems that are targeted by different drugs. What body systems were targeted by thalidomide, and what was the sort of mechanism by which it caused all those deformities originally?
That's an amazing question. Thank you Caleb gives me the opportunity to be a little bit more specific on the biology of the system. So it's actually the same exact biological system. So the thalidomide avoids the growth of blood vessel. The fact is that if there is a fetus growing inside a mother, then the target will be specifically there because it's there where the vessels are mostly growing, since usually in the adult human body the vessels are already formed. So there is going to block, and the problems is the fetus is not going to develop in the right way, and you have malformities on arms and legs. But if you have a tumor, a kind of tumor that in order to stay alive, he has to continuously grow new vessels to catch the nutrients from your body, then you can use the same drug to stop that growth, that vessels to grow, and not like, of course, hitting any other growth, any other vessel in a fetus, because you're not giving it to a pregnant woman. So it's what changes in that case is the condition. You don't give it to a pregnant woman, you give it to a person that is developing a cancer tumor that is using that is developing new growth factor, new vessel, new blood vessels, and you want just to stop that thing growing. Hope it was clear.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very helpful.
All right, great. So it looks like we have a question for Aritha in the chat from John, who says, I heard a young woman who wants to get pregnant and is worried about possible effects from this vaccine. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't have any thoughts per se, but like I think a couple of weeks ago, the CDC published some information about COVID vaccines for people who are either pregnant or breastfeeding. I can link to that here, but like I am not, I'm a public health professional. I'm not a medical doctor. So I think I will like recommend that you talk to your doctor.
Yeah, just follow the CDC guidelines, I guess, you know, whatever they're recommending. That would be also, if I can just add on there. Yeah, so thank you all so much. Are there any other questions before we end here?
I have a quick question and then a comment, actually. A question for Julie. I was wondering, what is your favorite particular animal venom, and why is it your favorite? Like, is it particularly like there's an evolutionary story behind it that's really interesting? Or is it that the animal's really cool? Or is it that the effect is really interesting or severe in some way?
They're also cool in different ways. Like, for instance, so since I'm doing pain research, I'm obviously more focused on species that are used for that. The cone snails have been like leading to FDA approved drug for the treatment of chronic pain already. So they're like very cool. I think maybe my favorite might be the ciguatera, which is actually kind of like a underwater plant, and that has like venomous properties, and if you can isolate the molecules, it causes cold pain specifically. So it's just like if you like have like ice and salt in your hand, you know, like I don't know if anyone has ever tried this challenge, but like it's like very specific thermal pain, and so it causes that. And so it's like fish try to eat it and they use these venoms like that, like as protection. So I think it's like very interesting to think of those basically just water plants that actually are like also venomous. Right. But they're all super cool.
Very,
awesome.
very
Thank you
cool.
so much.
So we have one more quick question. I know we're running a little bit over time, but just to ask very quickly, someone's asking about herd immunity. So if 99% of people are vaccinated and I'm not, and I come into contact with an infected person, what good is herd immunity?
Herd immunity would just like, so like if more people are vaccinated, the probability of you coming in contact with someone who's infected will decrease, because the number of people in the population who are infected will decrease. So it is good that there's like less probability of you getting infected.
All right, great. So I think, Caleb, did you have something that you wanted to mention here at the end?
I did, yes. A quick comment. So thank you all for joining us here today. Thank you so much again to Brooklyn Public Library for hosting us. This is the second time Brooklyn Public Library has hosted us. Typically, we're in Connecticut, so it was really a pleasure to branch out to a whole nother state, especially in this time when mobility and in-person talks are really restricted. So we really appreciate you for hosting. And then I'd love to give another round of applause to the speakers. If we could all unmute for a second and just like clap, that would be awesome. Excellent. Nothing really beats an audible round of applause. And then I'd like to also give a round of applause to Christiane. All of our talks at Science in the News have a coordinator that sort of is the manager and the guiding light for all of the speakers. And so Christiane was that for this talk today, and she did an excellent job bringing all the speakers' visions into one single vision for today. And then also, if you enjoyed this talk, anyone else who's here and you'd like to see more talks in the future, please follow Brooklyn Public Library on Facebook. Please follow Yale Science Communication on Facebook and LinkedIn, or check out our website. And I'm sure we'll be sharing that with Brooklyn Public Library in the weeks to come. So stay tuned. We'd love to have you at future talks, and we appreciate you coming out and watching us despite your busy days. So thank you all.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much for our scientists. Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Yeah.